Welcome to the Boring Biography channel, where we dive deep into the lives of famous figures and explore what truly shaped their journeys. Settle in comfortably, for today we will uncover the fascinating story of Bernard Jean-Étienne Arnault and the forces that drove his remarkable life. Why did Bernard Arnault continue when it seemed the odds were against him? What was it that kept him going, even when success was far from certain? Bernard Arnault entered the world in Roubaix, a textile town in northern France, on March 5, 1949. Roubaix, with its mills and measured rhythms, offered a setting where work and resourcefulness mattered more than show, and the atmosphere of that place stayed with him. Family life centered on diligence and order, with the example of a father in industry and a mother whose family name, Savinel, linked to the business that would first shape his training. School days passed through the Lycée in Roubaix and the Faidherbe Lycée in nearby Lille, a quiet progression through rigorous courses, the kind that reward steady application rather than flash. In those years, the path seemed straight, the goals familiar, and the expectations practical. The surroundings did not invite extravagance. They invited focus. It would be years before the name Arnault would be tied to the most famous brands in luxury. And in these early days, the habits of careful attention were the closest thing to a signature. Arnault earned admission to École Polytechnique, France's storied engineering school, and graduated in 1971. The education was technical and demanding, filled with mathematics and engineering assignments that trained patience as much as intellect, and he absorbed the lesson that complex problems often yield to clear structure. Upon graduation, Bernard Arnault entered the family firm, Ferret-Savinel, based in construction and public works. The young engineer was no overnight rebel. He learned procedures, met clients, and spent time with teams who kept projects on schedule and within constraint. Over time, he formed an impression that the future in heavy construction might not match the rewards that careful development of real estate could bring. The thought was not a sudden flash. It was a slow coalescence that angled toward action as markets shifted and as modern urban France began to value property development in new ways. In 1974, the firm sold its industrial construction activities and took the name Farinel, and in 1978, he rose to the presidency, a move that revealed a calm blend of deference to tradition and quiet appetite for change. Farinel's evolution taught him to study flows of demand and permission, to approach town halls and planning offices with patience, and to place measured bets. The economic climate of the late 1970s was not uniformly kind to new development, yet he kept looking for units with dependable buyers and places where modest scale could still compound. These were not years of lavish headlines. They were years of training hands and eyes. As the new decade approached, he reached another practical conclusion: that exposure beyond France could expand his understanding. The choice grew quietly, out of spreadsheets and site visits, and a sense that there was more to learn about financing and positioning. In the early 1980s, Bernard Arnault spent time in the United States, especially in Florida, to develop condominiums and to establish a branch of the family property business. The period put him next to a different tempo, a place where financing structures grew more intricate and where scale and branding blended into a single commercial language. He watched how developers stitched together deals and how projects paired patience with promotion, and he formed a personal feeling about America's business climate that would linger long after he returned to France. The experience did not make him a showman. It gave him comfort with financial tools and with the quiet force of structure. When the moment came to pivot, those lessons helped him weigh risk with poise. In France, a large, troubled textile empire called Boussac Saint-Frère needed a rescuer. The group held an asset of great cultural and commercial power in Christian Dior, and also owned Le Bon Marché, the venerable left bank department store, alongside many businesses that had lost momentum. The French state, weary of supporting decline, wanted a buyer who would restructure without grandstanding. In 1984, Bernard Arnault, working through the holding company Financière Agache, and with guidance from Lazard's Antoine Bernheim, acquired control of the group. The new owner moved deliberately, sold off weak or peripheral units, and focused the core around Dior and Le Bon Marché, a decision that put brand value and heritage at the center of a plan for renewal. Observers later debated the exact symbolism of the purchase price and the tone of the cuts. Yet the essential fact stands: he identified what was enduring, protected it, and shed what was not. By the late 1980s, the reconfigured group was back to profitability, and Dior had the room it needed to breathe again. As the decade advanced, two established French names, Moet Hennessy and Louis Vuitton, had merged in 1987 to form LVMH, and governance at the new group was unsettled. A path opened for a shareholder with a coherent vision to take the reins and bring clarity. The investor from Roubaix began buying shares, first through agreements with partners, and then in open market purchases until he reached decisive weight. In early 1989, he secured control and was elected chairman and chief executive, a position he has retained for decades. The strategy that followed was not chaotic expansion. It was a structured, almost architectural program to gather maisons each with a strong identity, to preserve their creative independence, and to support them with sourcing, management, and patient capital. The results arrived step by step. The group's profits climbed, its market value multiplied, and the underlying thread in Arnault's method became visible: never to let the financial consolidation crush the local culture of each house. Scaling up introduced a new pace. Under the LVMH umbrella, he welcomed houses with long histories, each one chosen for its distinct voice. Celine joined in the late 1980s, Guerlain in the mid-1990s, Loewe soon after, and Sephora as the decade moved toward its end. In the following years, Fendi came under LVMH control, Bulgari arrived in the early 2010s, and Loro Piana followed, each bringing a different texture to the group. The principle was constant: preserve the name and the soul of the maison, provide resources and structure, and let creative teams work without the noise of quarterly panic. The numbers, written in words for clarity, were large, yet in his approach the scale felt secondary to the integrity of product and experience. A luxury brand, in his view, is not rushed. The care in how a bag is stitched, how a flacon is cut, how a storefront welcomes a passerby, all of it adds up to the only growth that lasts. Among the most visible episodes in that growth stood the long story of Tiffany & Company. The first agreement, reached before the pandemic, had to cross stormy seas as the global economy slowed and as both sides weighed their footing. There were lawsuits and strong letters, and then there was a return to negotiation with a modest price adjustment and a renewed commitment to close. The acquisition was completed in January of 2021, and management changes followed to position the jeweler for new chapters. Alexandre Arnault took a senior role in product and communications, bringing energy that paralleled his earlier work at Rimowa. The Jewel of New York joined a Paris-anchored group and kept its blue box, its address, and its promise of special moments, now supported by the wide logistics and craftsmanship network of LVMH. The method matured as Arnault learned from rivalry as well as success. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a sharp contest unfolded around Gucci, with legal maneuvers in Amsterdam and headlines that pitted two French groups against each other over an Italian house. The outcome did not favor LVMH, which ultimately sold its stake as another group took control. The lesson had a quiet echo later, that not every fight improves a collection, and that the most resilient growth comes from alignment rather than siege. The same reflective tone surfaced in another dispute, the stake building in Hermès through derivatives, which drew scrutiny from the French Market Authority and led to a fine in 2013. The company accepted the decision and later agreed to distribute its Hermès shares, and the episode entered the archive as one more signal that the margins of ambition require careful navigation. Crisis has a way of testing cadence, and in 2008, the global financial crisis set a chill across retail and travel. LVMH stayed focused on product quality, on measured store openings, and on sustaining designers while audiences regrouped. A decade later, the pandemic closed boutiques and choked supply lines, and in those strained months, the group worked across maisons to protect know-how and staff, while adjusting to local rules. The approach held the center together, and when doors reopened, the houses were ready to serve with calm precision. The patience in the system mattered, the distribution depth mattered, and the consistency of creative direction mattered more than pronouncements. Return and maturity brought other kinds of building. In Paris, the Fondation Louis Vuitton opened in October of 2014, a glass and light structure designed by Frank Gehry and set by the Jardin d'Acclimatation at the edge of the Bois de Boulogne. The building looked like a ship of glass and wood, yet inside it carried a purpose that had nothing to do with commercial sales. It was a place for contemporary art, for concerts, and for communities to see work in a space of clarity and grace. The foundation reflected a private passion for classical music and visual arts, and an impulse to leave a civic mark that felt open and generous. In April of 2019, when Notre Dame suffered its terrible fire, the Arnault family and LVMH pledged €200 million to the restoration, an act they described simply as solidarity in a time of national loss. The gesture sat in the same quiet register as the foundation, a form of responsibility that did not seek applause. Media held a small but steady place in his vision of cultural life. In 2007, the group acquired Les Echos, a leading financial daily, and later, in 2015, it added Le Parisien and its national edition to the portfolio through the Les Echos Le Parisien group. Radio Classique, within the media branch, linked the economic morning conversations with music programming across the day. These outlets did not overshadow the luxury maisons. They sat alongside them in a broader understanding of how information, culture, and commerce interact in daily life. The approach resembled other parts of his method: keep the identity of each title firm, provide stability, and let professionals handle their work. Within LVMH, the next generation found its lanes one by one. Delphine Arnault rose through roles at Dior and Louis Vuitton, before becoming chair and chief executive of Christian Dior Couture in 2023, responsible for a house whose name defined the earliest turn in her father's career. Antoine Arnault, long associated with Berluti and Loro Piana, and with the group's image and environmental commitments, took the leadership of Christian Dior SE, the family holding company that anchors control of the group. Alexandre Arnault moved from making suitcases modern at Rimowa to guiding product and communications at Tiffany. Frédéric Arnault led Tag Heuer and later the broader LVMH watches division, and in 2025 moved to head Loro Piana, while Jean Arnault shaped watchmaking at Louis Vuitton as a younger guardian of craft and clarity. In this family setting, the culture was steady rather than theatrical. Regular reviews, clear targets, and the same measured patience that marked their father's approach. A large group must also be a place for distinct creative voices to thrive. Over the years, Bernard Arnault hired and supported designers who brought their own languages to the houses, and he paired creative leadership with business leaders who respected and protected that voice. LVMH let Louis Vuitton become a cultural touchstone without losing its leather working roots. Dior found different ways to speak to new generations while honoring the line of the bar jacket and the spirit of the atelier. Fendi balanced Roman warmth with modern architecture. Bulgari polished Roman jewelry codes into a global vocabulary. At Sephora, a retail approach that treated the store as a place of discovery helped the group understand how customers actually move through a day. The cadence of acquisitions never hid the importance of the slow work. Arnault often prioritized workshops and training with the same seriousness he brought to deals. He made time to visit tanneries, silk mills, glassmakers, and jewel setters, because the future of a luxury group stands on the future of its crafts. The lessons of the 1970s and early real estate work remained alive, namely, that long returns belong to those who keep learning the details. In this, he favored calm over dramatics. He once said, in a phrase that expresses his own priority, "I deal with creativity all the time." He also said, in a line that reduces much noise to an afterthought, "Money is just a consequence." Both thoughts fit the low register in which he prefers to operate. The late 1980s and early 1990s had taught him that growth could be firm without being rushed. Under his leadership, LVMH rested its culture on two pillars, timelessness and modernity, and let each maison translate those pillars in its own way. The group faced occasional criticism for scale, the worry that consolidation weakens character. Arnault's answer was to keep the houses decentralized, to demand quality without imposing a single flavor, and to invest in talent so that new work stays fresh. In his presence, the rhetoric is gentle, often just a nudge to focus on product and on the client's experience. A premiere in a Paris salon, a trunk show in Seoul, a refurbishment in Milan, a jeweler's bench in New York, each was a step in an ongoing walk rather than a crescendo. In moments of market strain, he avoided theatrical reactions. When currencies gyrated or tourism slowed, the group chose to refine assortments, to emphasize classic products that anchor demand, and to maintain relationships with artisans. The approach came from a belief that a house with clear identity and superb quality will find its audience even as macroeconomic tides shift. It was the same patience that guided him as an engineer, then as a property developer, then as the steward of heritage names. And the patience extended to governance, where in recent years, shareholders agreed to changes that allow him to remain at the head of LVMH into later age, an expression of confidence in continuity and in the succession plan that develops within the family and the group's wider leadership. Another gentle step, taken in a quiet meeting room, would reopen doors that had seemed shut, and the path ahead felt less like a leap than a long corridor. In time, the steady discipline of looking far down the corridor became the most visible part of his method, even when he rarely pointed to it himself. Across the decades, he also chose to support institutions and projects outside the catalog of maisons. The Vuitton Foundation in Paris stands as architecture and intention, and the family's support for restoration work at Notre Dame reflected a sense of custodianship that ties business to place. Media properties under the group's umbrella found their way to audiences as daily habits, with reporters and editors working in their own lanes. And the classical music programming at Radio Classique gave practical form to a private love of the piano. These are not diversions. They are expressions of a belief that culture requires rooms where it can be seen, heard, and read, and that preserving such rooms benefits everyone living around them. The story would not be complete without noting the controversy around a request for Belgian nationality during a heated period in French tax debates. The application, submitted in 2012, prompted public criticism and speculation, and in April of 2013, Bernard Arnault withdrew the request and reiterated that he would remain a French resident and pay taxes in France. He later explained that the legal structure he sought was aimed at ensuring smooth succession and preventing disputes among heirs. The episode, like the later settlement of the Hermès dispute, belongs to a set of events that called for explanations rather than applause, and the explanations arrived in the same restrained tone. The business moved on, and the group's governance kept evolving in public view. Within the Maison, his management style built on a simple rhythm. First, protect the product. Second, give creators the best conditions to do their work. Third, align operations tightly enough to bring reliability and loosely enough to keep each house's identity unforced. The rhythm shows up in the way he evaluates proposals, preferring a clear plan for craftsmanship and client experience rather than a promise of fast sales. It also shows up in the way he views store openings, where location and service matter more than the thrill of a ribbon cutting. Quietly, he visits workshops and ateliers, listens to teams who manage waiting lists or handle repairs, and carries those notes back to boardrooms. The gestures are not dramatic, they are cumulative. The public sometimes frames luxury in loud terms, as if the category relies on shine more than substance. Arnault's career offers a different view. The shine, in his understanding, is a surface on work done underneath. A leather worker, a watchmaker, a perfumer, a dressmaker, a cellar master. These are the people who keep a name alive, and the job of a group is to build structures that respect their pace. If a dress requires hand finishing by a small team over many hours, then planning must honor that tempo. If a watch caliber must pass tests that take long cycles, then the calendar must sync with that. When marketing speaks next to such work, it must be honest and clear, because the trust arrives from the object, not the campaign. Even in this careful culture, mistakes can teach. The Gucci struggle showed how contests can distract. The Hermès episode showed how financial engineering may prompt regulatory concerns. Each time the household adjusted, not by retreating from ambition, but by returning to first principles. And when the global health crisis pressed retailers everywhere, the group's insistence on conserving talent and craft meant that reopening would not require rebuilding from scratch. Losses in a quarter do not diminish a century of heritage, and a house that honors its craft will regain its footing with grace. The long arc of acquisitions and integrations reveals a constant preference to keep adding to the group's circle of excellence while leaving identities intact. The list is wide, from Sephora to Fendi, from Bulgari to Loewe, from Guerlain to Loro Piana, and more. In each case, the group encouraged investment in archives and museums, in craftsmanship schools and training centers, because the future is not only the next collection, it is the next generation at the bench. The commitment extends to sustainable sourcing and traceability work, where the group's scale can help whole supply chains adopt better practices. The goal is stability that does not turn rigid, a base that supports motion without wobble. Private life remains largely private, yet a few elements connect to the story of the group. Bernard Arnault married Anne de Wavrin in 1973, and together they had 2 children, Delphine and Antoine. The marriage ended in 1990. In 1991, he married Hélène Mercier, a Canadian concert pianist, and together they have 3 sons, Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean. Music and art, present in his home life, show up in patronage and in the spaces the group maintains for culture. The blend of family and company is not theatrical in this case, rather a visible, methodical preparation in which each adult child takes on responsibilities and is judged with the same measures used for any executive, knowing that the father reserves final decisions for himself until the baton can pass without haste. As the decades turned, he also embraced the role of guardian for certain Paris institutions. The reopening of La Samaritaine, the store whose Art Nouveau lines had charmed Parisians for generations, required a long restoration and a patient dialogue with the city about how to respect history while making a modern place of commerce and hospitality. Hotels entered the group's orbit as well, with names in Venice and the Caribbean, and with Bellman's legendary trains and properties joining the family of experiences. One could see in these moves the same impulse visible at the foundation and in donations for heritage, a wish to keep environments of beauty alive and useful to people who move through them every day. The line between commerce and culture is not erased, but it becomes less antagonistic. The human element extends to the way the group works with younger designers and artisans. Programs to nurture early careers, prizes to recognize new clothes and accessories, and internships that bring students into workshops form a pathway that keeps talent flowing. Arnault's presence at graduations and final reviews is not loud. He attends to the quiet signs, a seam finished well, a handle shaped for the hand, a perfume accord that feels inevitable rather than clever. He prefers when the story of a product comes from how it is used, not from how it is described. Audiences around the world have responded to that restraint, returning to houses for objects that perform and endure. In his public remarks, he rarely strays into philosophy. Yet when he does speak about motives, the language is simple. He emphasizes product first, insists that long-lasting quality matters more than quarterly numbers, and returns again and again to the idea that creativity paired with discipline builds companies that can last for generations. To those who asked for the secret a generation ago, he answered with a sentence that fits his approach: money is just a consequence. The remark honors a hierarchy, with product and client above profit, and with profit as the outcome of service and excellence. That order is soothing in a world otherwise obsessed with the scoreboard. There is also the ongoing work of succession, a subject that draws public curiosity but receives measured responses. Arnault has taken steps to ensure that his family's holding company retains control over time, while entrusting daily leadership of different maisons to people chosen for competence rather than name. Shareholders continue to support adjustments that keep him in office, and observers note that the presence of children in senior roles does not exclude capable outsiders from steering major divisions. The point is not a family soap opera. The point is continuity of culture, with future leaders proving themselves against practical standards and not against gossip. In any case, the maisons will continue to live through their craft, and craft does not recognize family names. It recognizes hands and minds, As a public figure, he tends to show reserve, especially when cameras search for strong reactions. He is courteous with rivals, careful with praise for his own group, and understated in victory. When the largest acquisition in the group's history closed in New York, he placed the emphasis on what the jeweler could become with time, rather than on the size of the check. When the foundation opened in Paris, he spoke of architecture and light, and of what the building could give to the city. When controversy appears, he answers with calm statements and returns to work. This consistency calms markets and teams, and in a field where excitement often carries the day, it is a quiet advantage. The world around LVMH continues to change. Digital channels introduce new ways to discover products. Travel flows reshape where stores should be and how they should serve. Younger clients request transparency about sourcing and commitments to repair and reuse, and the group explores ways to meet those expectations without giving up on rarity or on the sanctity of craft. In such changes, Bernard Arnault remains at ease in the long view. He accepts that tastes shift and that styles turn, and he expects the maisons to hold their center while letting new voices join the chorus. The living archive of each house keeps growth gentle and gradual, and the fundamental bet is the same as it was in 1984, that real value lies in names with meaning, made by people who honor that meaning. The story that began in Roubaix now spans ateliers and storefronts across continents, yet the cadence of the early years remains audible. It is the sound of seams pressed flat on a table, of a jeweler's file, of a bottling line in a perfumery, of a sales associate who knows a regular client well enough to serve without ceremony. It is the sound of patience, of capital willing to wait for quality to be recognized, and of leadership that trusts creators when their work is honest. Arnault's biography, stripped of headlines, reads as a series of calm decisions taken at desks and tables, sometimes in crisis, sometimes in quiet, with a mind trained in engineering and tempered by decades of listening to craft. As the sun sets on another day in Paris, it is easy to imagine the glass sails of the foundation catching soft evening light and a visitor pausing on a stair to look out toward the city. The scene fits the life, a balance between clarity and warmth, between structure and freedom. Bernard Arnault has kept his focus on the long line, on the comfort that well-made things bring to daily life, and on the knowledge that a house lasts when it takes care of its people and its clients. The result is not a sudden triumph. It is a gentle accumulation, a steady thread woven through years, and a restful idea that enduring beauty prefers quiet company.